I thought I was living the dream, about to marry the love of my life, until one night I discovered her betrayal at her bachelorette party. It broke me, but I knew I couldn't marry someone I couldn't trust. Walking away was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the best. With the support of my family and friends, I rebuilt my life, rediscovered who I am, and learned to value trust and self-respect above all else. Now I'm starting over, not with bitterness, but with hope, knowing I deserve better. I thought I had it all. My fiancée was everything I'd ever dreamed of: intelligent, beautiful, and the kind of person who just got me. From the moment we met, everything clicked. It was like life had finally handed me the perfect partner. We were only a month away from our wedding, and I couldn't have been more excited. The venue was booked, the invitations had been sent, and we were even searching for houses to build our future together. From the outside, our life looked perfect, and honestly, I felt like the luckiest guy in the world. But sometimes, even when everything seems to be going perfectly, there's this little voice in the back of your head, a tiny whisper you can't quite ignore. At first, I dismissed it as wedding stress. After all, planning a wedding is no small task. Still, the feeling didn't go away. That little voice got louder as the days passed. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something felt off. It wasn't anything she said or did, at least not anything obvious. Maybe it was the way she avoided certain conversations or how she clammed up when I asked about her bachelorette party a couple of weeks earlier. I told myself I was overthinking it, but that nagging feeling just wouldn't let me go. It sat in my gut, heavy and uncomfortable, until it finally pushed me to do something I'm not proud of. One night, after she'd fallen asleep, I grabbed her phone. I know it was wrong. I hated myself for even thinking about it, let alone going through with it. But at that moment, it felt like the only way to silence the doubt. I kept telling myself I'd find nothing, that I was being ridiculous. That's what I wanted to believe. But when I opened her phone, my world turned upside down. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding, as a message from her friend Rachel popped up. It was about her bachelorette party. At first, I tried to brush it off. What could Rachel possibly say that would justify the sinking feeling in my chest? But then, more messages started coming in. Before I knew it, I was scrolling through her texts, her emails, even her Facebook messages. I told myself I'd stop as soon as I saw something innocent. Instead, every message seemed to pull me deeper into a nightmare. What I found wasn't just one mistake. It wasn't something small that could be brushed aside or forgiven. The messages laid everything out, the kind of night she had at her party, the decisions she made, and how her friends encouraged it all. They laughed about it afterward, as if it were just some harmless fun. As I sat there reading, my stomach churned. The life I thought we were building together started to crumble right before my eyes. It was in that moment I realized everything was about to change, whether I was ready for it or not. As I stared at her phone, the first message I saw seemed harmless enough. Just a casual note from Rachel about her bachelorette party. That was such a wild night, it said, followed by a string of laughing emojis. At first, I told myself it was nothing. A bachelorette party is supposed to be wild, right? Everyone drinks too much, dances, and laughs with their friends. That's normal. But something about the tone of the message made my stomach turn. I couldn't explain why, but my gut told me there was more to it. I hesitated. For a second, I thought about putting the phone down and walking away. Maybe I didn't need to know. Maybe I was overreacting. But then another message came through, this time referencing someone by name, someone I didn't know. My curiosity got the better of me. I opened the chat, and that's when it all started unraveling. As I scrolled through her messages, my heart started racing. The casual mentions of that night at the bachelorette party quickly gave way to something much darker. The first real clue came from a message Rachel sent. "You're so lucky you got to blow off some steam before the big day." I read it again, hoping I'd misunderstood, but the meaning was clear. My hands were trembling as I opened another thread, this one between her and her other bridesmaids. They weren't even trying to hide it. They were joking about how hot some guy at the party was and how everyone deserves a free pass before tying the knot. That's when I found it, the name I'd seen earlier. He wasn't just some random guy at the party. He was someone she'd gone home with. I kept reading, hoping against hope that I was wrong. But the messages left no room for doubt. "Last night was insane," one message read. "Can't believe you actually went for it." Another chimed in, "Well, if you're going to do it, might as well be now, right?" The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Every joke, every casual remark about what happened felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I sat there in the dark, staring at her phone, feeling like my entire world had collapsed. My chest felt tight, and my hands were shaking uncontrollably. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just read. This wasn't just a mistake. It was premeditated, planned, and even encouraged by the people she trusted most. How could the woman I was about to marry, the person I thought I knew better than anyone, do this? I poured myself a drink, hoping it would calm me down, but it didn't help. I felt sick to my stomach, as if the ground had been pulled out from under me. I stayed up all night, rereading the messages, torturing myself with every detail. Part of me wanted to wake her up and demand answers, but I didn't know if I could even look at her. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and completely lost. When morning came, I was still sitting in the same spot, clutching her phone like it was a bomb I didn't know how to defuse. She woke up and noticed something was wrong immediately. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft and full of concern. For a moment, I almost broke down and told her everything. But instead, I lied. "Just a bad dream," I said, forcing a smile. She tried to hug me, but I pulled away. I couldn't pretend everything was normal, but I also wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed time to process what I'd discovered. As soon as she left for work, I started making a plan. I knew I couldn't go through with the wedding. Not after this. But how do you walk away from someone you thought you'd spend the rest of your life with? I couldn't face her, couldn't bear to hear her excuses or explanations. Instead, I started packing my things. I canceled the wedding venue, knowing I'd lose the deposit, but I didn't care. This wasn't about money. It was about self-respect. I saved screenshots of everything I'd found, proof of the betrayal that had destroyed our relationship. By the time she called me, begging for an explanation, I was already gone. The morning after discovering her betrayal felt surreal. I hadn't slept. My head was spinning, my chest felt hollow, and my hands trembled as I poured another drink to calm my nerves. When she woke up and saw me sitting at the kitchen table, the concern in her voice almost broke me. "Are you okay?" she asked, reaching out to touch my hand. I flinched, pulling away instinctively. I couldn't let her touch me, not after everything I'd seen. I lied through my teeth, telling her I'd had nightmares, pretending I was just stressed about the wedding. She seemed to buy it, reassuring me that everything would be fine. She kissed me goodbye before leaving for work, completely unaware that it would be the last time she saw me in our shared home. The second she walked out the door, I felt a wave of relief. I could finally think clearly. The first thing I did after she left was grab a suitcase. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. As I packed, I kept glancing at her phone, now sitting on the counter like a ticking time bomb. I had taken screenshots of the messages, saving them as evidence. Not for anyone else, but for me. I needed to remind myself that what I saw was real, that I wasn't imagining things or overreacting. Once my clothes were packed, I made the hardest call of the day, the wedding venue. Canceling our dream wedding was a gut-wrenching decision. I didn't even know how to explain myself, so I kept it simple. "The wedding is off," I told the coordinator. They reminded me of the 15% cancellation fee, but I didn't care. Money meant nothing at that moment. What mattered was taking the first step toward reclaiming my life. Next came the calls to other vendors, the photographer, the caterer, the florist. Each call was another reminder of the future I'd lost. By the time I finished, I felt drained, but there was also a strange sense of empowerment. For the first time since discovering the truth, I was taking control. The hardest part of the day wasn't packing or canceling the wedding. It was telling my parents. I called my mom first, knowing she'd be the one to understand. I didn't give her the full details, just enough to make it clear that the wedding was off and that my fiancé had betrayed me. My mom was heartbroken, but she didn't push for more information. "You don't have to explain," she said softly. "Just tell me what you need." My dad called back a few hours later, his voice steady but filled with concern. He told me he was proud of me for standing up for myself, even though he knew how much this decision must have hurt. Both of them offered their support, promising to handle any questions from extended family or friends. Knowing they had my back made the process a little easier, though the pain still lingered. Once everything was packed, I grabbed my suitcase and left. I didn't leave a note or send a message. I just walked out the door and hailed a cab. The driver didn't ask questions as I gave him the name of a hotel an hour away. I spent the ride staring out the window, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The hotel room was small and unremarkable, but it was exactly what I needed. It was a space where I could be alone, where I didn't have to pretend everything was okay. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through the screenshots on my phone. Each message felt like a dagger to the heart, but I couldn't stop reading them. I needed to remind myself why I had left, why I couldn't go back. That first night in the hotel, I cried for the first time since discovering the truth. It wasn't just sadness. It was anger, betrayal, and the overwhelming realization that my life would never be the same. By the next afternoon, my phone was buzzing nonstop. My fiancée, her sister, her parents, and even my friends were trying to reach me. The messages ranged from confusion to outright panic. My fiancée's calls were the hardest to ignore. Her voicemails were filled with tears and pleas for me to come back, each one more desperate than the last. I only answered one call, my mom's. She asked if I was okay, and I assured her I was, even though I wasn't sure that was true. I told her I needed space, and she promised to keep everything quiet for now. The more the calls came in, the more I realized how much damage her betrayal had caused, not just to our relationship, but to everything around us. Her family was in chaos, and even mutual friends were taking sides. Some people tried to convince me to forgive her, saying it was just a one-time mistake. But I couldn't ignore the lies, the betrayal, and the sheer audacity of laughing about it afterward. By the end of that first full day in the hotel, I made my decision. I wasn't going back. There was no fixing this, no way to rebuild trust. I had to let her go. After a day of ignoring her calls and messages, I knew I couldn't avoid my fiancée forever. She deserved to know why I had left, but I wasn't ready for an emotional showdown. When I finally answered her call, her voice was raw from crying. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her words laced with desperation. I stayed silent for a moment, letting the weight of her question hang between us. Then I told her to check her messages. I had sent her the screenshots. Everything I had found, the texts with her friends, the conversations with the guy from the bachelorette party, was now in her hands. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Moments later, she called back, sobbing uncontrollably. "It's not what you think," she stammered. "It was a mistake. I didn't mean for it to happen." Her excuses tumbled out one after another, but none of them mattered. The damage was done. When she begged me to come back so we could talk in person, I refused. "You broke my trust," I said simply. "And without trust, there's nothing left." Hearing her cry was painful, but it was nothing compared to the pain she had caused me. It didn't take long for her family to get involved. Her parents called me the next day, both of them clearly shaken by the news. Her father was the first to speak. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "I didn't raise my daughter to act this way." His words felt genuine, but they didn't change anything. Then her mother got on the phone. She was more emotional, pleading with me to reconsider. "She's devastated," she said. "She knows she made a mistake. Please don't throw away everything you've built together." I listened quietly, letting her pour her heart out, but I knew there was no going back. What hurt the most was hearing how much pain this was causing her family. They had treated me like one of their own for years, and now everything was falling apart. But as much as I cared about them, I couldn't let their feelings dictate my decision. This wasn't about them. It was about me and the life I deserved to live. As the calls and messages continued, I discovered that her sister, Sarah, had played a significant role in the events leading up to that night. While going through the screenshots, I found messages between Sarah and my fiancé. Instead of discouraging her, Sarah had encouraged her to let loose and have fun at her bachelorette party. She even reassured her the next day, telling her not to feel guilty because it's your last chance to be wild. When Sarah eventually called me, she sounded defensive at first. "It wasn't a big deal," she said. "It was just one night. You're really going to throw away 5 years over this?" Her words ignited a fire in me. "Would you stay with someone who cheated on you at their bachelorette party?" I asked. She fell silent. After a long pause, she muttered an apology, admitting that she should have stopped things from getting out of hand. Her apology felt hollow. Sarah's role in the betrayal cut just as deeply as my fiancé's actions. It wasn't just about the cheating. It was about the lies, the cover-ups, and the lack of accountability from everyone involved. A few days later, her father reached out to me directly, asking to meet in person. Reluctantly, I agreed. We met at a small coffee shop, far from the chaos of everything that had happened. He looked older than I remembered, the stress of the situation clearly taking a toll on him. "I want you to know," he began, "that I understand why you left. If I were your age, I probably would have done the same thing." His honesty caught me off guard. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt like someone truly understood my perspective. He went on to say that he had been married for over 30 years and had learned that sometimes people make terrible mistakes. "You have to decide if the good in someone outweighs their worst moment," he said. His words stayed with me, but they didn't change my decision. "I respect you," I told him, "but I can't marry someone I don't trust." He nodded solemnly, shaking my hand before leaving. As he walked away, he turned and said, "Whatever you decide, you'll always be family to me." His kindness meant more to me than I could express, but it didn't change the fact that I couldn't go back. The more people tried to convince me to reconcile, the more I realized how deeply her betrayal had affected me. It wasn't just about the cheating, it was about the lies, the cover-up, and the betrayal of trust. Even if her family forgave her, I couldn't. By the end of that week, I knew I had made the right choice. I wasn't just walking away from her. I was walking away from a life built on lies. As much as it hurt to leave behind the future we had planned, I knew I deserved better. I deserved honesty, trust, and respect. The first few days after leaving were a blur. Alone in the hotel room, I found myself cycling through waves of anger, sadness, and disbelief. At times, I wondered if I had overreacted, if maybe I could have confronted her and worked things out. But every time those thoughts crept in, I would open my phone and look at the screenshots. The evidence was irrefutable, a painful reminder that the life I thought I had was a lie. Being alone gave me space to think, to process everything that had happened. There were no distractions, no obligations. It was just me and my thoughts, as painful as they were. For the first time in years, I had to ask myself what I truly wanted, not for her, not for our families, but for myself. And the answer became increasingly clear. I needed to rebuild my life on my own terms. In those early days, my parents became my rock. My mom called me every day, not to push me for details, but just to make sure I was okay. She had always been the person I could trust with anything, and this was no exception. My dad, though less vocal, offered quiet reassurance. "You're doing the right thing," he told me more than once. "Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and without it, you've got nothing." My brother, Tom, showed up at the hotel one evening, suitcase in hand. "You shouldn't go through this alone," he said, handing me a bag of my clothes and my laptop. He stayed with me for a couple of days, giving me the kind of no-nonsense advice I needed. If she could do this now, what's stopping her from doing it again later? He asked. He was right. Hearing it from someone I trusted helped solidify my decision to walk away. Friends can be a lifeline during tough times, but I quickly learned who my real friends were. Some people, even those I'd known for years, tried to convince me to give her another chance. "It was just one mistake," they said. "Don't throw everything away over one bad decision." Others wanted details, gossiping about what had happened as if my pain was just another story for their entertainment. But then there were friends like Mike. When I called and asked if I could stay with him for a while, he didn't hesitate. "Of course," he said. "You don't even have to ask." Moving in with him felt like a turning point. Mike didn't treat me like I was broken or fragile. Instead, he just treated me like a friend. We played video games, watched movies, and laughed about dumb things. Slowly but surely, I started to feel like myself again. As the days turned into weeks, I couldn't help but analyze the relationship. How had I missed the red flags? Were there signs I had ignored? I realized that I had been so focused on building a future with her that I had overlooked the cracks in our foundation. The betrayal wasn't just about what happened that night. It was about the lack of respect, the dishonesty, and the way she laughed about it with her friends. In hindsight, I saw that I had been blind to the truth. But instead of dwelling on the mistakes, I chose to focus on what I had learned. The most valuable lesson I learned during that time was the importance of self-respect. Walking away wasn't easy. In fact, it was one of the hardest decisions I had ever made. But staying with someone who had betrayed me would have been even harder. It would have meant sacrificing my dignity and settling for less than I deserved. As I reflected, I realized that her actions had shown me who she truly was. And as painful as it was to accept, I knew I couldn't marry someone I didn't trust. In choosing to leave, I was choosing myself, and that made all the difference. Moving in with Mike marked the start of my recovery. It wasn't a grand transformation or some sudden moment of clarity, but simply having a friend who didn't treat me like I was fragile helped more than I expected. Mike's apartment became a safe haven, a place where I could unwind without worrying about judgment or questions. He didn't push me to talk about what had happened unless I wanted to, and that freedom gave me the space to heal. The first few days, I barely left his couch. I felt drained, both emotionally and physically. But slowly, I started picking myself up. We fell into a routine, playing video games, binge-watching our favorite shows, and ordering way too much takeout. It was mundane, even boring at times, but it was exactly what I needed. For the first time since the betrayal, I started to feel like myself again. The hardest part of moving forward wasn't the emotional recovery. It was dealing with the practical aftermath of canceling a wedding. My ex-fiancée had left me several voicemails and emails about vendors and payments. I ignored most of them, but the reality of the situation eventually caught up with me. With Mike's help, I started making the calls. Some vendors were understanding, refunding deposits or waiving cancellation fees, while others weren't as forgiving. I didn't argue. I just wanted it all to be over. The wedding dress, decorations, and gifts we'd received in advance were the last reminders of what could have been. I asked my mom to help return everything to her family. She didn't ask questions. She just did what I needed. The final step was the engagement ring. I had carried it around in my jacket pocket since the day I left. Eventually, I handed it to my mom, asking her to return it to my ex-fiancé's parents. I didn't want anything to do with it anymore. Once the logistical loose ends were tied up, I started focusing on myself. I returned to work, where my boss and colleagues gave me the space I needed. At first, people walked on eggshells around me, unsure of how to act. But as the days went by, things returned to normal. Work became a welcome distraction, a chance to focus on something other than my personal life. Outside of work, I started rebuilding my life in small ways. I went back to the gym, something I hadn't done regularly in years. The physical activity was therapeutic, giving me an outlet for my frustration and stress. I also picked up old hobbies I neglected, playing guitar, sketching, and even trying my hand at cooking. Each small step felt like a victory, a reminder that I was more than the man whose fiancée had betrayed him. Mike also introduced me to his circle of friends, people who didn't know my story or see me as the guy who got left. Being around them was refreshing. It gave me a chance to just be myself again, without the weight of my past hanging over me. Slowly but surely, I started to feel like I was moving forward. As I began to heal, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. There were days when the anger and hurt resurfaced, but instead of dwelling on them, I tried to focus on what I had learned. The betrayal had taught me the importance of trust and self-respect. It showed me that I deserved a partner who valued honesty and loyalty as much as I did. It wasn't an easy journey, but the pain forced me to grow. I realized that moving forward wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about learning from it and becoming stronger because of it. 6 months after leaving, I met someone new. It wasn't planned or expected. It just happened. We met at a bar downtown, introduced by mutual friends, and ended up talking all night. For the first time since the breakup, I felt a spark again. It was terrifying and exciting all at once. We started dating slowly, and while I was cautious, I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't expected. She didn't know my past, and that felt like a blessing. With her, I could start fresh, unburdened by the weight of what had happened. It was the first real step toward building something new. Looking back now, I can see how far I've come. The man who left his fiancée that day is not the same person I am today. I've grown stronger, more confident, and more self-aware. I've learned to set boundaries, to trust my instincts, and to prioritize my own happiness. Walking away from someone I loved was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the best decision I could have made. It gave me the chance to rebuild my life on a foundation of honesty and self-respect. And for that, I'll always be grateful. Months after the breakup, I ran into Sarah, my ex-fiancée's sister, at the grocery store. She looked exhausted, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed as though she hadn't slept in days. At first, she turned to walk away when she saw me, but then she stopped, hesitated, and came over. "I owe you an apology," she began, her voice trembling. "Not just for what happened, but for how I handled it. I should have stopped it. I should have told her it was wrong." For the first time, her words felt genuine, not an attempt to protect her sister or salvage the situation, but a true acknowledgement of her role in what had happened. I nodded, unsure of what to say. I didn't absolve her, but I appreciated her honesty. As she walked away, I realized that her apology, though late, marked another step in my healing process. The anger I had harbored toward her began to fade. Not long after, I received a message from her father asking to meet for coffee one last time. I agreed, unsure of what to expect. When we met, he looked healthier, more composed than the last time I'd seen him. "I just wanted to check in on you," he said. "No agenda, no pressure. I've always thought of you as a son, and I want you to know that hasn't changed." His words were a bittersweet reminder of the family I had lost. He told me his daughter was doing better, having moved to another city and started therapy. He wasn't asking for me to reconsider, but wanted me to know that she was trying to rebuild her life too. "Sometimes the hardest choices end up being the right ones," he said before we parted. His understanding and lack of judgment brought me a sense of closure I hadn't expected. As time passed, I found myself letting go of the anger and resentment I had carried. It wasn't an easy process. There were moments when memories of her betrayal still stung, but the weight of those emotions lessened over time. I realized that holding on to the pain only kept me tied to a past that no longer defined me. Forgiving her didn't mean excusing what she did. It meant releasing myself from the grip of those feelings. Letting go was for me, not for her. It allowed me to reclaim my energy, my peace, and my sense of self. A year after everything fell apart, I found myself flipping through an old box of photos. Among them were our engagement pictures. For the first time, looking at them didn't hurt. They felt like relics of another life, a reminder of how far I had come since that day. Life didn't go the way I had planned, but it had a way of setting me on the path I needed. Walking away from that relationship wasn't just about leaving her. It was about choosing myself. I'd learned to trust my instincts, value my worth, and never settle for less than I deserved. After months of staying with Mike, I decided it was time to take the next step in rebuilding my life, moving into my own apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Picking out furniture, decorating the walls, and making the space feel like home became a surprisingly therapeutic process. For the first time, I had a place that was entirely my own, a reflection of who I was and who I was becoming. Living alone gave me a sense of independence and control that I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about having my own space. It was about reclaiming my life. I no longer had to compromise on what I wanted or tiptoe around someone else's expectations. It felt liberating. This apartment wasn't just a physical space. It was a symbol of my fresh start, a foundation on which I could rebuild my future. Once I settled into my new place, I made it a point to focus on myself. I developed a routine that prioritized my physical and mental well-being. I started going to the gym regularly, not just to stay in shape, but because the physical activity helped clear my mind. The repetitive motion of lifting weights or running on the treadmill became a form of meditation, a way to channel my frustrations into something productive. I also returned to hobbies I had long forgotten. I dusted off my guitar, started sketching again, and even joined a cooking class. These small activities brought me joy and reminded me of who I was before the relationship. They weren't about filling the void, though they certainly helped, but about rediscovering the things that made me happy. Each day felt a little brighter, and for the first time in a long time, I looked forward to the future. My circle of friends quickly became my own. They didn't know the details of my past, and that was exactly what I needed. Around them, I didn't have to be the guy whose fiancée cheated on him. I was just me. They invited me to game nights, barbecues, and weekend hikes, pulling me out of my shell in ways I hadn't expected. Through these new friendships, I began to rebuild my confidence. Conversations no longer felt heavy, and I stopped second-guessing every interaction. Meeting new people reminded me that life could still be fun, even after everything I had been through. One night, at a small gathering, I met someone new. Her name was Emily, and we clicked almost immediately. She wasn't trying to fix me, and I wasn't trying to prove anything to her. It was just easy, natural. That spark I thought I'd never feel again began to flicker. Starting a new relationship with Emily was both exciting and terrifying. After everything I'd been through, I was hesitant to trust again. But she never pressured me to open up. Instead, she gave me the time and space I needed to heal. With Emily, I felt like I could be myself without judgment. She didn't know my past, and that gave me the freedom to focus on the present. Slowly, I started letting her in, sharing bits and pieces of my story. Her kindness and patience reminded me that not everyone would hurt me, and that trust could be rebuilt one step at a time. As I stood in my apartment one evening, guitar in hand and laughter from a phone call with Emily still echoing in my mind, I realized how far I had come. The pain that once consumed me had faded into the background, replaced by hope and excitement for the future. Rebuilding my life hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. I was stronger, wiser, and more self-assured than I had ever been. The betrayal that had shattered me had also shaped me, teaching me the importance of self-respect and resilience. I was no longer just surviving, I was thriving. The most important lesson I took from this experience was the value of trust and self-respect in any relationship. Trust isn't just a foundation, it's the bedrock. Without it, everything else crumbles, no matter how perfect things may seem on the surface. I had always believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt and seeing the best in someone, but this taught me that trust must be earned and nurtured. Self-respect was another revelation. Walking away wasn't easy. It went against everything I thought I knew about love and commitment. But staying in a relationship that compromised my dignity and self-worth would have been far worse. I learned that it's okay to put myself first, to set boundaries, and to demand the kind of love and respect I'm willing to give in return. Leaving wasn't just an act of self-preservation. It was a declaration of my worth. Another lesson that stuck with me was the importance of listening to my instincts. That gut feeling I had, the one that kept me up at night, nagging at me until I finally acted, turned out to be right. It wasn't paranoia or insecurity. It was my intuition picking up on something my mind hadn't fully processed yet. I used to think ignoring those feelings was a sign of strength, a way to avoid unnecessary conflict. But now I know that listening to my intuition isn't a weakness, it's a survival skill. That night, my instincts pushed me to uncover the truth, even though it hurt. It reminded me to trust myself, to believe in my ability to recognize when something is wrong. If I hadn't trusted my instincts, I might still be living in a web of lies, building a life on a foundation of dishonesty. This experience also showed me the incredible resilience of the human spirit. At my lowest point, I felt broken, lost, and unsure if I could ever recover. But with time, support, and self-reflection, I came back stronger. The pain didn't destroy me. It reshaped me. It forced me to confront my fears, redefine my priorities, and rediscover who I was outside of that relationship. Every challenge I faced along the way, every hard decision and painful moment became part of my growth. I learned that moving forward isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about using the lessons to create a better future. In hindsight, the betrayal, as devastating as it was, turned out to be a gift. It forced me to reevaluate what I want in a partner and what I'm willing to accept in a relationship. It taught me to appreciate honesty, loyalty, and the small, everyday gestures that build trust over time. Most importantly, it gave me a new perspective on life. I now know that it's better to be alone than to be with someone who doesn't value you. Starting over wasn't easy, but it showed me that I'm stronger than I thought and capable of building a life that truly fulfills me. Looking back on everything, I can see how much I've grown since that day. At the time, leaving felt like the hardest decision I'd ever made. I was walking away not just from a relationship, but from a future I had spent years envisioning. The pain was overwhelming, and the uncertainty about what came next was paralyzing. But with time, I began to see the truth. Leaving wasn't the end, it was a new beginning. This journey taught me that sometimes the hardest choices are the right ones. I learned to trust my instincts, to value myself, and to never settle for less than what I deserve. It wasn't easy, but every step I took, no matter how small, brought me closer to the person I was meant to be. The betrayal didn't break me. It reshaped me into someone stronger, wiser, and more self-aware. I wouldn't have made it through this journey without the incredible support of my family and friends. My parents gave me the space to heal, while quietly reminding me that they were always there when I needed them. My brother, Tom, helped me see things clearly when my emotions clouded my judgment, and Mike became my anchor when I felt like I was drifting. These people reminded me that I didn't have to face this alone. Their kindness, patience, and unwavering support were lifelines in my darkest moments. They reminded me of the value of true relationships, the ones built on love, trust, and respect. In a way, losing one relationship helped me appreciate the others even more. It's a lesson I carry with me to this day. No matter how strong you think you are, having people to lean on can make all the difference. As I move forward, I'm filled with hope. The life I'm building now isn't the one I had planned, but maybe it's the one I was meant to have all along. Meeting new people, reconnecting with old passions, and taking each day as it comes have reminded me that life is full of unexpected opportunities. The spark I've found with someone new shows me that love isn't off the table. It just takes time, patience, and the right person. No matter what happens, I know I'm ready to embrace the future, not with fear or bitterness, but with an open heart and a stronger sense of self. To anyone reading or listening to this story, I want you to know this. You are stronger than you think. Life doesn't always go as planned, and sometimes the people we trust the most let us down. But those moments, as painful as they are, can teach us who we really are and what we deserve. Don't be afraid to walk away from what no longer serves you. Trust yourself, value yourself, and surround yourself with people who lift you up. Starting over is scary, but sometimes it's the best gift you can give yourself. You're worth it. Always remember that.